Okay, in this video we're going to work on buffs and kind of show you how I have this working here. The first thing I want to do is go into the database and let's look at just the buff side. Whoops. Let's browse them. And you'll notice that I already set up some buffs in here. Got the powerhouse with the strength and the reflex, and the most important thing is the actual ID, because that's what's going to point to each buff. But you basically put in the name, the buff time, this is in seconds. The stat name, it's important that this name right here matches the exact stat that you want to buff. Make sure the capitalization and everything is exactly the same. And then the value of how much is going to go up. Like this will bring strength up 10, this will bring strength up 4, and so on. Pretty easy. We do have now, when we go to our inventory or our items that we create, basically all you have to do is put in under buff. All I did was if whenever you're in your equipment, if buff is greater than 0, in other words, if the ID is greater than 0, then that means there's a buff activatable, and all that buff is the number of the ID of whatever buff is in here. The buff name doesn't have to match over here. I basically did that so you wouldn't have to query twice whenever you're pulling your inventory. That way you don't have to query for the item and then also query for the buff. You just put the same name as you put in the buff and it'll be fine. It'll show it. But in case you want to put something else, it's totally fine. But I don't recommend just putting the ID here and then pulling another query on the buff to get the name and all that, unless you want all the stats of the buff right there. Then that's fine, but I'm just doing names, so there was no point in doing a whole query just for a name when I could just retype it one time. If we go over and kind of look how this works, if we go to our inventory, I think I have a cheeseburger in here that gives you strength. I just did that for an example. If we activate it, we'll notice that here's our counter, and no matter what we do, our counter is going to keep running, and it'll just sit there and run till it's out. And you'll notice that my strength is up right now, and whatever we go to, we still have it. And the only thing that you are going to notice that you're probably not going to like is that I did everything in PHP. The only thing I didn't do in PHP is the actual counter, but as far as I wanted to keep everything simple in PHP, as far as how it works, just to make it easier on everybody. But you may want to change that later to JavaScript so you can update this in real time, this stat. But for now, the stat's going to stay the same until they refresh the page or they go to somewhere, which most likely they're not just going to be sitting here staring at a number anyway. But these numbers only refresh as the page refreshes, because PHP is a server-side language and you're not going to be able to actually change that document type. But it's not bad. I mean, it's I don't see any reason to change it unless you really want to keep everything fresh. I mean, if I guess using JavaScript to make it an actual change on time, exactly at the right time, probably is a good idea, but I mean, it's not necessary. Anyway, so let's kind of look how this works real quick. If you go into index.php and you look at your activating an item, you'll see I've got if is set get activate. In other words, if when it's passed, when you use it on the item, then we're going to go here, we're going to bypass the map, we're going to get our get mod, get randed, and then pull that item. And then if the item uses is greater than 1, or I'm sorry, less than 1, then there's no uses left on the item. That way you can have an item that you can activate and keep and maybe reactivate later. If the buff is greater than 0, we want to check that again so nobody tries cheating. Then we're going to actually find the buff. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select all from active buffs, and if there is, in other words, if that character does have an active buff, then it's going to go through this once and it's going to say I equals 1. If I does not equal 1, if there's no buffs, if it never had to go through that, then we're going to let him do a buff. But if it does equal 1, then we're going to say you already activated a buff, and we're not going to let him activate another one. You can change that number to how many ever buffs you want to allow, but you need to make sure to create a new time thing for each buff, because I didn't, I only allowed 1. Then we're going to select the buffs, and then what we're going to use, here's how we're going to do our count on our time. PHP time function basically calculates from January 1st, 1970, I think it is, and it does it in seconds. So how much ever time has passed since, and this sounds crazy, but how many ever seconds have passed since 1970 of January 1st, that's what time it's going to give you right now. So what we want to do is we want to take total time, total seconds since then, and add our buff time. Let's say it's 30 seconds, add 30 seconds. That's going to give us our run out time. Then we're going to insert that into active buffs along with the value and the stat name. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to update the players, and we're going to increase their stat, whatever stat that is on the buff, plus that value, and that's what does the increases. And then we're gonna take uses equals uses minus 1. If you want items to destroy after the uses go to 0, you need to insert in here if uses is less than 1, or actually if uses is less than 2, because remember, it's not going to update automatically. So in other words, you're not going to requery. So let's say the uses is 1. Well, this is going to minus that by 1. So if the uses is less than 2, that means it's 1 plus you're minusing 1 more. That's what it's going to make it 0. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, you'll figure it out as you put it in here. But anyway, if items is less than 2, then delete that item is how you're going to put that in there. I didn't, because I was going to make chargeable items. Anyway, then it prints it out. And that's kind of all we're going to have right there. That's how you activate an item. Now to do the time, this you may want to change. I was actually going to change this later, but I just haven't yet. Right stat panel is almost pulled in every single call. I would create a new file and call it buff panel. I would still, or buff check or whatever, and I would check this. I would leave this in here, but I would do the buff check maybe in a new file. As long as you're going to pull the right stat panel in every single file, then this is fine what you have right here, because you need to be able to check for that buff time on every single page, no matter what page they go to. And that's why I put it in right stat panel, because that right stat panel is going to be there on every case except for your inventory. So you may want to put this something else in your other stat panel, or however you want to do it, but make sure it's checked on every single page. So basically, we're going to select all from active buffs, and we're going to do our time function again. We're going to time equals our buff time minus the actual time. So that's going to give us the time that's left, and if that time is greater than 1, then we want to put the buff there. We want to actually, if it's greater than 1, then we want to take the buff. We want to put the buff on there. If it's less than 1, then we want to delete that buff. We want to delete it from the active buffs, and then make sure to erase the stat that it gives it plus the value, so their strength or dexterity or whatever goes back to the normal stat. And this is all real simple. Just read through it a couple times, you'll figure it out. This all prints it out in that active buff. Now here's the thing. Here's where we actually print it out. I use JavaScript here, and I know we haven't went over JavaScript very much, but it's real simple what we're doing here. If I haven't already said, JavaScript, you have to define your variable. It's not like PHP where you can just say Joe equals 1. You have to declare it first. So here I'm declaring, in var is how you declare it. I'm declaring buff time equals, and this is how you get a PHP variable into JavaScript. You echo out whatever that variable is. So here I echoed out time. I set up a couple more. I'm not going to go in detail on this JavaScript because I'm not ready to explain JavaScript completely yet. This is a bad example to explain it, so I'm going to kind of shoot through this, but I'm just defining some variables here. I have a document set that is actually, document is defining that little counter time that you've seen, and it's basically given a value of 30. And then here's where we're going to display our function. The function is actually called display. And then here's where I break it down into the milliseconds and seconds, and that's what you see changing. And this is what I did, is I went back to that document. So every time this thing is running, you're going to see this milliseconds get added. There's a set timeout, and then it's going to go to display. So in other words, I'll kind of explain this in the best way I can without getting too complicated on it. Display is going to start up right here. It's going to go through once. If everything is above 0, then it's going to print out what the seconds and time is, and then it's going to do it again. It's going to do it again and again and again until there's no more, and then it's going to stop till it hits. It's actually just going to stop at 0 and stay printed out at 0 until you refresh the page, and then this won't run again, and then your buff will be gone. I know it's not the best way to explain it, but when we get into JavaScript in a couple more videos, you'll come back and you'll understand it. But this isn't the way I want to explain, the easiest way to explain JavaScript. But if you just read through this, you'll figure it out really, really simple how it works, and you'll actually be able to go through here and make this how you want. But that's it to buffs. I mean, buffs are really, really simple.